What is going on, everybody? This is the Reformation Keegan, and I'm going to do another comic analysis today. Today, we're specifically going to look at the death of Superman. So, this is the comic that defined the 90s. Between 1992 and 1993, we had the death of Superman. And Dan Jurgens, too, is one of my favorite comic writers, and possibly my favorite Superman writer, which is going to make my comments today a bit ironic and also a bit paradoxical. However, I want to say first, this worked for me in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways, this story did not work for me. And I'll state why. First off, I truly believe that the death of Superman was obviously constructed to be a marketing tactic to get attention on DC, and I also believe that this was a cash grab. However, this was a good cash grab. So, with the death of Superman, one of the things that I think is really difficult to assess is the why and the who, what, where, when, why, and how. So, I believe that this title needed to happen. But I think this is a double-edged sword because you have to look at this from a marketing point of view and you have to look at this from a literature point of view. And I look at most things from a perspective of literature. However, you have to have the marketing value in this title. So I think immediately labeling this the death of Superman is a blessing and a curse. Because one, you're going to get the casual audience to have immediate interest in this story because Superman dies. And I also think a lot of other people would insinuate that Superman would not die and that this would just be a marketing ploy to get people to read the comic and he would die momentarily but come back, which in the death of Superman, spoiler, does not happen. So it's a double-edged sword due to that fact. And I think titling this the death of Superman from a literature point of view is problematic because you're already giving the audience what they supposedly are supposed to not know. And when you do that, it's basically giving them the dessert before the dinner. And you are telling them already what the result is. But from a marketing point of view, I totally understand why you would title this the death of Superman. Because people will automatically want to buy this, even if they know what's going to happen. So that's a bit of a problematic instance of a title in literature. So we're just starting with the title. And one of the things I want to do here, everyone, is not make this video too long because I believe that retention is at an all-time low, and that's for all of us because we have things like shorts and we have TikTok videos and Instagram reels and things of that nature, which go 60 seconds or under, and even 3 minutes or under, depending. But my videos are not going to be that short. In fact, this one's already over 3 minutes. But I'm trying to make these a tad shorter just so the retention is there on the video and people do not check out. But I want to get into this as an arc and in the final issue, Superman 75. I think the arc itself is well done. There wasn't as much verbiage and dialogue as I thought there would be, because around this time in the 80s and 90s, a lot of comics had a lot of verbiage. There are pros and cons to that. A con, for example, would be Crisis on Infinite Earths, which I believe is a great story, but there is too much going on. There's a lot going on in those stories, and I get it because you have to tell the story from a DC point of view with all these characters, but that's a very problematic instance to have because you have too many cooks in the proverbial kitchen. On the other hand, Alan Moore is very good at having a lot of verbiage, but having that verbiage contribute to the story, where the death of Superman has a lack of verbiage. There is verbiage, just not as much. And that also goes into the fact that you have a character like Doomsday who more or less laughs and grunts and does not speak, which again is a blessing and a curse. But you don't want a character like Doomsday speaking too much because if you do, then the character loses the luster that, may be there, but also if you give this character a lot of speech, then Doomsday becomes more human, and you don't want Doomsday to be more human. So having an evil laugh and breaking things is simple, but I think in this case, that kind of character is very effective, because in this arc, we don't know a lot about Doomsday. This is Doomsday's origin. This is Doomsday's beginning, and I think that he's introduced very well. I think Doomsday just walking around looking for carnage raises a lot of questions. And I think to a lot of people, this could be a hermeneutic irritant where you don't know what Doomsday's intentions are, but we would know in subsequent titles, like obviously The Return of Superman or even the Doomsday Wars, Superman, Doomsday, Hunter and Prey, all great titles. We get to know more about the backstory of Doomsday himself. So I think that's a good example of less is more, and I believe the less is more approach is used well in The Death of Superman. The only thing is, when you're marketing this title as the biggest title of the 90s, some of the audience may feel a bit cheapened by the less is more approach. But I think that's the only way you could write this. I think if you have too much verbiage in this, you basically diminish the characters. If you have Lois talking too much, you diminish her. If you have Clark talking too much, you diminish him. If you have too much of Lex Luthor's involvement here, because we believe he turned a new leaf, which we know in subsequent stories he does not, that limits him. And I actually think a lack of Lex in this works better. And I say that works better because then you leave room for more stories going forward with Lex throughout this canon. And one of the things that I really like is the characterization of this story. And I'm going to talk mostly about the characterization of Doomsday. So you have Doomsday take out the Justice League. He smashes Guy Gardner. He destroys the Supergirl doppelganger that Lex actually sent. And he basically kills Ted Kord, aka the Blue Beetle. And I think this is really strong because you're having Doomsday immediately from the get-go take out the most powerful team arguably in all of comics. This well-oiled machine, Doomsday just walks through them. And to me, when you use ethos, which is credibility, you are making Doomsday instantly credible. And you're not even diminishing the JLA here, because you are presenting Doomsday as the individual who walked right into Superman's territory and took him out. To me, instant credibility for taking out the JLA. And on top of that, you have a really good theme of suspense, because you have Doomsday walking through areas, destroying whatever he can find. And then he sees, obviously, the wrestling poster, which begs the question of the fight coming to Metropolis and who is going to be part of that fight. And Doomsday, seeing that, knows he has to go to Metropolis. And the great conflict of this story is that Superman does whatever he can to keep Doomsday out of Metropolis, and he can't do it. And that shows a lot, because Superman is always the one who has the power in the end to change things and to change the stories of others in a positive way, and also, need I mind you, change the fate of his rival. And by doing that, he helps them see a version of themselves that they can't see. But Doomsday's almost soulless. We don't know who Doomsday is or where Doomsday comes from at this point. So in 1992-93, we don't know anything about Doomsday. This is a complete unknown coming in and taking Superman out. And one of the things that I've thought about is Doomsday's knowledge. How much does Doomsday know? Because Doomsday sees the ad for the matches in Metropolis. So we know Doomsday can fathom language. Doomsday can read. Doomsday can probably even hear things and understand them. So Doomsday is an intelligent monster that a lot of people haven't really talked about. Just because you are inaudible other than laughing or grunting doesn't mean you're stupid. So lack of noise doesn't equate to stupidity. And Doomsday knows exactly where to go to get to Metropolis. So Doomsday has a really great sense of direction too that I don't find is discussed enough. And I think this arc really shows a lot about Superman too, because like I said, he does everything he can in his power to keep Doomsday out of Metropolis. And Superman, for once, permanently, is outpowered. So that story of power is also very intriguing. So my verdict is this. I believe this is a very, very strong story. And I think that the conclusion actually works well. Because I think if you had Doomsday just come in and just take out Superman, completely squash him, and there's no big fight, then the story would feel a bit cheapened. Because these two destroy the physical aspect of Metropolis, and then they destroy Metropolis emotionally as well, because Superman dies taking out Doomsday. So Doomsday has the aura around him that consists of taking out the Man of Steel. But what's funny is Doomsday punches Superman. Superman doesn't even feel that punch, but then when Doomsday kicks him and throws him, we can see Superman feel something. And even when Doomsday hits him, Superman bleeds. And usually Superman does not bleed from other human beings, but we find out that Doomsday is basically derived from Kryptonian origin, which is why Clark bleeds. So that's a very, very interesting concept that I think is overlooked. Only Superman's own, or through kryptonite, can visibly make him bleed. So a lot of really good underlying themes in the death of Superman. And to be honest with you, I don't even think this cracks a top 10 list for Superman stories, which is saying a lot, because there are many, many, many great Superman stories, because I think this story is actually just the tip of an iceberg. And I would say in 1992 or 93, even going into 2000, I'd say this is a top 10 Superman story. But because of the progression of the character, I think we've gotten a lot more well-rounded Superman stories, and I actually like the Doomsday Wars just as much as I like this. I even like Doomsday Hunter and Prey as much as I like this, because I think they give you a sense of completeness. And I feel like you have to read all of these stories along with the Return of Superman to get a really strong understanding of the implications of this. Because to me, the death of Superman is just part one of a multi-part series of Superman not just returning, but through Doomsday's story. So that is that. However, I will say this. The portrayal of Doomsday in Smallville, I wanted to get to this, is bittersweet. Because Doomsday here takes out Clark when Clark's an adult at full strength. But in Smallville, they have a 30-second fight where Clark just rids Doomsday after a whole season of suspense. I really wish in Smallville they could have done something like this, maybe minus the death because you have to continue a couple more seasons afterward, but do something that makes Doomsday this kind of threat. Because throughout a lack of speaking and just by physical force, Doomsday becomes the biggest threat ever to Superman. So that was my analysis. Let me know what you think. Also, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. I love doing these analyses and I would love to do more. Let me know if you are interested. I am currently debating on whether I'm going to do my Captain America analysis, which I really, really want to do. I just want to find time to put a lot of effort into that analysis before I actually post the video, because I believe that that story as well has a lot of implications on the 21st century, and it shows a good divide between American beliefs and beliefs within the Orient. So let me know what you think, and I'll be back with more soon.